Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I'm the author of 12 books, a CEO of 12 years, the founder of a startup set on data privacy, most importantly, an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, the United States to Australia. Most excitingly, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance, specifically behind how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. My work includes everything from mitigating injuries to conditioning behaviors that set a player up long-term for the long game towards a top 10 tennis ranking. I'm behind theories from the optimal performance theory, optimal behavior for optimal performance, the barrier breaker, the rule of transference to the golden rule. As has become custom, each episode we dive into the latest rankings and results on the WTA and ATP tours and deliver new data implications as shared in my latest release, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking. And no episode would be complete without diving into one of my many other books and sharing additional insights whilst digging a little deeper. We've been focusing on the secrets to optimal coaching success, the role of experience, optimal performance practices and outcomes in the real world, with over 70 episodes to date. Today's insights and key topic play its own role, like so many other episodes, in developing the player, parent to coach for that road ahead towards a top 10 tennis ranking. So, as always, buckle in and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today. Look, if you've been with us for some time now, thank you so much, and I really hope you've been enjoying the change of pace, I think, and I guess how we've been weaving in those results, the rankings, and then diving into, time permitting, one of those key sections of one of my books, as really I think took the spotlight in those initial first, I want to say roughly 60 episodes, and I had a lot of fun, but at the same time, I hope you're having just as much fun with this new format. And as always, I'd love to hear your feedback on this, because today we've got some really exciting metrics to go over. If you are new, I really would encourage you to track back more so to roughly, let's say, episodes prior to 50 and or before we started this new format, which I think we've been doing now since the Australian Open. So roughly, let's say we're 10 episodes deep. And I think the most important part is from the release of How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking, which came out in December, which again, I've said this for the last couple of weeks, time has been flying. I can't believe it has been almost 3 months. That is absolutely crazy. That will actually be next week, so almost. But the best part is that it has freed me up to share those additional data implications that weren't necessarily front and center in those initial episodes that were released. Well, a good 70 plus where we're sitting now. But today I really wanted to dive into the rankings to start with, but to do something a little bit different and to track back directly from 200 towards 1. Typically, I've been sharing those key ranking movers inside predominantly the top 20 and then some primary movers inside the top 100. But as we know, if you're sitting inside the top 200 and you are progressing, we do have some underlying metrics that underscore specific progressions and or not. At the same rate, I have touched on throughout, I guess, my body of work and also, yes, my recent release and a couple of episodes, I guess I've been very subtle by sharing this, is that we have key patterns here, specifically when we're looking at players ranked 50 in the world towards 200. And one of those key patterns is we know when you're stuck, so you're hovering. And what I mean by that is that last episode, I guess I dived deep into the long game and the pathway. So I wanted to take a little bit of time now to dive into the 7 keys and then the 8th key. Those of you who are familiar, I'm sure you know or you've heard me mention, but at the very least, the 7 keys and the power of the 8th key. If you are new, don't fret. I'm going to give a little bit of a breakdown here. And essentially, the 7 keys more is available at AMA International. And the 7 keys were designed roughly, let's say, 18 months to 2 years ago, around what it takes to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. So keep in mind that this is all backed by science. So we have the data, we've got those metrics, we've got over 150,000 inferences on players on the WTA and ATP tours. So it's a study that's never been done before, and until I broached this essentially, which has been going 11 years plus. I think this year is going to actually mark 12 years, believe it or not, which is incredibly exciting. So I guess you can understand, as someone and as a scientist that's been tracking players for over a decade on specific movements, key patterns and parameters of play, it's very unique and it's very different in respect to other, let's say, data analysts. Because when we're talking about data and science and these key metrics, currently what data is used for, and I've touched on this previously, it's to inform a player's strategic perspective, let's call it, on who they're playing and how to modify their game and really their game plan. But what we're talking about here, and where these 7 keys come into play, it's what a player needs to incorporate in their own game explicitly. I really want to underscore that, and how it's directly correlated with that top 10 tennis ranking, which means irrespective of the level of play, if you integrate these 7 keys, it has been scientifically proven, so with statistical significance for those who have their hands up and they're following in respect to those scientific metrics, that you have an incredibly high likelihood, in contrast to any other player, to progress towards a top 10 tennis ranking, which is groundbreaking, landmark, never before, and all of those wonderful buzzwords. And I really want to highlight here and emphasize my background as a high performance coach prior to, I think, pivoting to pick up the pieces in respect to delving into the sciences, because my journey, I suppose, whether it was from a high performance player, receiving a full scholarship to play in the NCAA, and then becoming one of the highest coaches qualified globally. And when I say that, I have the highest coaching certification globally available, and I had that at 26 years of age, and I had just before the pinnacle, I attained that at 20 years of age. So I was very fortunate to be an absolutely exceptional coach from a very young age, and it actually coincided with, I guess, the end of the last few years of my playing career. Where I'm going with this is that my hands-on experience from an athlete and the struggles that I had, but then also being in that unique position by working with players, whether it was in Australia, Europe, to directly in the United States at this time. And what has obviously transpired since then is that master's, so that postgraduate qualification there, and then my doctorate that I went on to pursue specifically around this, looking at why. To begin with, I was riddled with injuries. What was the cause? And we know why now, the incorrect techniques that I was playing with and what's essentially saturated in the coach education resources globally, which means if you are a tennis coach or you have a tennis coach, the likelihood of their skill set aligning with a technique that is potentially going to injure a player, if you are that player, fair warning, is that potentially you will get injured. And for the coaches, this isn't to say to get you worried, but it's to ring those alarm bells to say the coach education system in this respect universally is behind, and that's where these injuries come from. And this is one part that really fused together these 7 keys to ensure a player was not only safeguarded from injuries, that it also correlated with optimal performance practices and outcomes, and that top 10 tennis ranking. So I'm sharing, I guess, a bit of a backstory there from those qualifications, that skill set, because of that hands-on experience and I guess the heartbreak that I experienced, not being able to progress, from my body not being able to push further, because from a very early age in my mid-teen years was when those injuries started. So it was actually quite early. That said, I do see a lot of players 18, 19 plus already carrying an injury, but also even players in their second decade of play that I've also touched on previously. So where I'm really going here is that we need to set those foundations. And again, with that coaching background, it really has afforded me over the past now 15-ish years to ensure that when we're looking at science and the metrics there, and I intertwine that with the highest coaching accreditation, quite fortunately, it positions me as the highest qualified coach globally, which is really cool. And I think that the cherry on the top there is as a woman. And I say that tongue in cheek because we know the landscape, and that I've been trying to share, I guess, these new insights for the best part of the last decade. But unfortunately, predominantly men are at the top, and they have not been open to these changes. So irrespective if you are a man or woman out there, I really hope you are keeping an open mind, because at the end of the day, we're talking about 2 fronts. One of them being how to safeguard your player, irrespective, I guess, their current level, if they're that 10-year-old, that 21-year-old, that 29-year-old, etc. There are these key metrics, so these 7 keys we put in place to make sure these new technical parameters are being integrated and applied into those key patterns of play that, on the second front, produces over that set period of time that top 10 tennis ranking. So when you visit the long game, again, on AIMA International, it's been extracted from one of my books, I Am Your Tennis Coaching Guru, which yes, it's a play on words, but it dissects and shares that 10 years of those progressions, specifically from 18 years of age through 28 years of age, just as a ballpark, how to progress to that top 10 tennis ranking and what happens, what you can expect for your ranking, and how it is going to progress over that set 10 years. And it's really an average, an approximation, because you can fast track that and obviously attain a top 10 tennis ranking much sooner. And we know the likes of Swiatek, Gauff, Alcaraz, Tarun, just as example, have achieve top 10 tennis rankings much sooner. And I know there are more players in there. These are just examples. So how this circles back to the 7 keys is that these 7 keys are absolutely fundamental to have into your game. So all of this data has been broken down to include just 7 subsets, because we know, and again, this is the science talking, that if I gave you 12, 20, 50, 100 different little instances you need to integrate into your game, 1, you're not going to remember them. 2, it's incredibly overwhelming. And 3, when we're looking at the learning curve to the learning spectrum of an individual, so that's that humanized approach coming in, and oh my goodness, I've missed that. If you've been listening for some time now, you are familiar with that. But when we're looking at how an individual learns, how they retain knowledge, how they're able to apply specific, let's say, again, those patterns of play, how they're able to recall those key points, we need to break them down into concise blocks of information. And we get to unpack it. So when we're looking at those 7 keys, they've been boxed up as little gifts, if you like, to integrate and to unpack into your game. And then you're asking, what about the 8th key? Where does that come from? Yes. So the power of the 8th key, which is the subtitle of my latest release, is that it's sitting there waiting essentially for those 7 keys to come to life. So once you've been able to integrate those 7 keys into your game, that 8th key takes you all the way. So if we look at it like that, there's 8 subsets now. But you are reliant on those 7 to begin with before the 8th can take full force or full effect. And if we cycle back now to these rankings that I've touched on, the top 200, we know if you have that ranking, whether it's from 50 in the world through to 200, we know that potentially 1 or 2 of those keys are currently being worked on, are progressively being solidified in your game. And we know those progressions that are going to happen over that 6 to 12 month period, and it's going to maintain a cyclical approach, so that ranking will progressively move and it will more increasingly ascend towards, say, the top 30, top 20, and eventually the top 10. However, it's also a very big bucket, in a manner of speaking, on both tours, WTA and ATP tours, for players to get stuck. So this is where we see a lot of players that have really huge potential get stuck. And what I mean by that is that you see them hover and they reach a plateau that I touch on this in how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, as well as my other texts. And you see these players, whether they're 80 in the world and they've reached that new performance peak, but they struggle to crack the top 50. Or you have a player ranked 180 in the world and they hover between 150 and 180, but that's about it. That's their peak. They're struggling to increase those patterns of play, to integrate more of these keys into their game, and that's why they get stuck. So when we're looking at players inside the top 200, it really paints a different picture in contrast to only the top 100, as we'll typically continue to do so. But today, when we're just taking a step back to share that a different focal point, because we can have a look at these players and say, are these players going to continue to progress? Are they on a regressive streak, in a manner of speaking? Or are these signals, are these signposts showing these key metrics that underscore the player's next peak performance cycle, followed by that next? And if you're sitting, I guess, in the scientist seat and obviously that coaching framework, etc., you can see how exciting and interesting this is. But more than anything, when you've been able to understand and wrap your head around all of these 8 keys, essentially Grand Slam after Grand Slam is what at stake. And being the year where that gold medal is on the table, with Paris just being around the corner now, and I'm sure it's going to come up very quickly, this is what we touch on and what you are capable of. And again, it only comes across every 4 years, given that cycle with the Olympics. But we know with the data what's achievable and attainable with these 8 keys, and that's how exciting it gets. My wish, and I've written about it in a number of my books, for every single tennis player to tennis coach, is to harness these 8 keys so we make those dreams become a reality. And I'm sure I'm quoting directly from my latest text there, because that's really what it's about. It does sound, I'm sure, to many too good to be true. But when you are behind the data and you have that unrelenting passion for the game, and this is spanned now for over 20 plus years, you're able to break this down. And to the point, and I've touched on this previously, when I'm looking at top 10 players, I can pinpoint and share with you why these players are going to regress outside the top 10, why certain players are going to progress into the top 10, why some are positioned to stay and others will soon again regress, why set players are poised to win their maiden Grand Slam, and why other players are set to win their second, third, fourth, and so on Grand Slam. And that's how exciting this data gets. But I could talk about this over and over and over again, but I think after that introduction, let's dive into these rankings. We're going to move from the WTA rankings through to the ATP tours, and let's have a look at some key movers. So if we're starting on the WTA, Rebecca Peterson is at 200. So she's just cracked into the top 200 as a ranking mover. She is, and I don't typically do this, but I'm going to shout out some of those age ranges to give additional insights on those progressions. So Peterson's 28 years of age, which suggests she's been hovering around this ranking range for some time and or thereabouts. And if, I guess, though, that key progression is on the cards, those 8 keys, but recall those initial 7 are absolute to ascertain in the next 2 seasons for that peak performance inside the top 50 to have a chance inside, I will say, the next 3 seasons. Other ranking movers, let's go to 190, Polina Kudermetova. She has regressed 32 places to sit at 190. However, she's 20 years of age, which means there was a drastic increase, and now we've got a regression. 20 years of age, she's finding her feet. She's found that she knows how to progress, but we're looking at that pattern. if we're looking at cycles where you progress, no, those 7 keys are not integrated into your game. We are looking for clear patterns here that shows that knowledge upkeep, which means if you are 20 years of age, we need those 7 keys to progressively being solidified into your game. The same applies for Solana Sierra, ranked 185, has recently regressed 21 places, although she's only 19 years of age. So the same applies for the same player. Okay, Yana Fett, 27 years of age, has moved up 8 places to 174. This is a plateau, even though she has had her rankings increase. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say there's a ranking plateau that's been happening for some time now, and those 7 keys are absolutely fundamental for a progression inside the top 100 within the next 2 seasons. Madison Brengle, we know she's been inside the top 100. She's up, got a regression at the moment, but that's at 172. All right, as I track even more closer, we've got 175, up 10 places is Knutson, 26 years of age. Again, this is a plateau. We want those 7 keys integrated. A ranking here, even with a progression, suggests we have 1-2 keys integrated in our game, but they are not consistent. And we need to find that level of maintenance that makes these skills in an autonomous part of our game. Freedsome, 14 places of a regression at 159, 30 years of age. I'm going to again go with a regression. Those keys are not solidified in her game. We need again that upkeep. Hopefully you see the pattern here just with these couple of players that I'm pinpointing of what is absolutely necessary. Heather Watson has been closer. I believe she peaked inside the top 50, potentially closer, some years ago now. She's at 31 years of age, has recently regressed 16 points to 147 in the world. We know that once upon a time she had a reasonably, let's say 4 keys integrated within her game. 7, no. However, with this regression, that's a very big fluctuation. So potentially there are 2-3 keys integrated in her game, but they are not being recalled on a consistent basis. And that's what becomes quite problematic when we're looking at progressions and maintaining peak performances. All right, this next play is an up-and-coming Aussie, and she has been making, let's say, some headlines over here in Australia. 18 years of age, Taylor Preston has moved up 15 points to 138. She has steadily been progressing, which is very good. And at her current rate, she's actually looking at breaking inside the top 100, I'm going to say within the next 12 to 18 months. However, potentially within the next 6 months, which again I've touched on as being rapid fire, but some players have that capacity if they are integrating these keys into their game consistently, and they become more autonomous. So they reach that level of autonomy, and that's where things get exciting. Now, this is a very promising hope for Aussie tennis, even though we have a number of women. We've got Sharma and Gadecki closely behind her, but they are at 28 and 21 respectively. Gadecki also has been making progress, but Preston's progress of late has been a lot more fast-tracked in this manner. But both of those players, as far as Australian tennis is concerned, are ones to watch. But also when we're looking at players outside the top 100 with a likelihood of progressing inside to the top 100 within the next 12 to 18 months is incredibly high for both of these players, with the potential this season, if those peak performance cycle continue, at least for another 5 to 6 peak performances this season as a minimum. I've touched on those peak performance cycles previously, so I'm not going to dive into that, but that's incredibly important when we're looking at ascending into the top 100, but more so closer towards the top 50. Now, another Aussie that we are familiar with, 29 years of age, has been inside the top 30 is Daria Saville. She's up 32 places, 116, with her current progressions. Saville is definitely primed to crack into the top 100 and potentially inside the top 70, I would say, this season, if those peak performance cycles are able to be maintained. Definitely, Saville has a grasp on 4 to 5 keys, being positioned inside the top 30 previously. However, it's that level of maintenance, that level of upkeep, and that knowledge share, which means those 5 keys currently are not integrated in her game. It's finding them again, becoming familiar with these keys and progressively integrating them into her game. Because remember, just because you've got knowledge of these keys and they've been integrated in your game before does not mean that's the case now. You can not necessarily forget, but they lose focus. We need these 7 keys primarily front and center as focal points for the 8th key to amplify your game. An example here is Zidansek, just behind Saville at 117 in the world, 26 years of age. Zidansek, a couple of seasons ago, peaked. I think it was around a 16 performance from memory, either at the Australian Open or a Roland Garros, one or the other, but she was tracked a few seasons back, and she was from memory ranked between 70 to 80 in the world. But this goes to show that steep regression over the past few seasons because she wasn't able to maintain that current level and build upon it with those following peak performance cycles. So that's an example of a regression and a performance plateau, but also a consequence, also in a manner of speaking, of what happens when those keys are not upheld. All right, we're inside the top 100 now, and I'm looking for some peak performance movers. And now we've got Taylor Townsend, 77 in the world, has moved up 6 points. 27 years of age. I think everyone out there knows Taylor Townsend has that potential to crack inside the top 50, to be a danger on any given day if she can find that rhythm, that consistency that amplifies her game, that takes that down a notch. And what I mean by that is keeping with her groove, ensuring those key patterns of play out, opposed to let's call it forcing the error from her opponent, easily pushing her off court. So there are some very key metrics here that I'm not going to essentially pinpoint, but when we're looking at those 7 keys, no, Townsend potentially has those 2 or 3 hovering in her game, but they are not integrated. However, if we can see her track closer towards the top 50, that's suggesting 2 to 3 of those keys are becoming more and more integrated into her game as she's picking up additional keys along the way. And that's what I think makes the keys even more exciting, because we know if you are progressively integrating them, if you are losing touch with them, if they're not integrated into your game, and or let's say the patterns that follow in respect to your ranking. Now, this is a little bit surprising. Danielle Collins has regressed to 56, so she's back 8 points. She was inside the top 50. However, the past week, I think she's had a very solid performance, and we'll get to that later. So when we're looking at rankings, that's definitely not correlated with Corin's performance. And this is where the rankings, I think, let players down at times. Collins is definitely deserving of that top 30 ranking, if not to be positioned inside the top 20. Closely behind her at 55 is Kenin. It'll be very interesting this season if she can find her form and track back. And Kenin, she's only 25 years of age, so we have to remember, even though she has that Grand Slam to her name, she is still relatively young and has that room to peak. When we're looking at those 7 keys though, does she have them? Absolutely not. Does she have the capacity to attain them? Absolutely yes. Which means if Kenin can get a handle on at least 4 of those keys and solidify them into her game, here we go, top 30. An extra 1-2 keys, top 20. Once those 7 keys are solidified in her game, we have her tracking towards the top 10. 8th key, here we go. However, I really want to underscore this. Just because you've got the 8th key, it does not protect you from regressing outside the top 10. Recall again, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking discusses and divulges how to maintain your position inside the top 8%, in contrast to being a part of that 2% that regress each and every season. All right, Wang has had a very good season, the very good week in particular. 22 years of age, currently ranked 52 in the world, up 12 places, because it was her performance this week that really pushed her closer. The same goes for Yuan, 49, up 19 places, 25 years of age. Both relatively young players, both Chinese, following in Zheng's footsteps. And this is really exciting for Chinese tennis. And I want to underscore there that I apologize in advance for my mispronunciation, because I am quite positive that I am mispronouncing your last names, so I really do apologize there. But please use your current the ranking places that I have shared to identify these specific players due to my pronunciation there. All right, other movers we can look at. Blinkova up 6 places, 45 in the world. More movers that we're looking for. Donna Vekic has regressed 8 points to 36, so she did crack back inside the top 30, has slightly regressed. Now, Vekic is quite interesting here because we know she has been inside the top 20, and I think briefly inside the top 10 a few seasons ago now, which means she has had at least 5 keys integrated into her game, and very solidly. But what has happened is we've got a regression now, or let's say, for argument's sake, around 30 in the world, and she's been hovering here, and we have a performance plateau. This has been the case now for the last 2 to 3 seasons. Vekic can win against the best in the world sometimes on any given day, but that's a very big sometimes. She definitely has the potential to crack back inside the top 20, steer closer towards the top 10. However, this is reliant on Vekic ascertaining those additional keys, but more so integrating those keys she once had solidified in her game back into her game. At this point, she is not peaking. At this point, she is not on the trajectory for those peak performance cycles and for them to maintain or remain on a cyclical basis. Fernandez, 34. There's a bit of a regression there. I'd love to see Layla ascend closer towards the top 20, where we know she has peaked at. Kostyuk and Yastremska, 32 and 31 respectively. Both of these players are being tracked this season from their stellar performance at the Australian Open. And we know, and I'll touch on this later, Kostyuk has had a very good week. And top 30 now, Azarenka is sitting pretty here. So she's been hovering here for some time now. Noskova as well, 29, again from that Australian Open performance, but 19 years of age, which really underscores Noskova's potential. She already has a number of keys in her game, being 29 in the world. However, we are going to see within the next 2 seasons if she's at a ranking plateau or we're going to see her further peak closer inside the top 20 and break into those teens. And I definitely think she's a one to watch. I like Paolini in the past fortnight. Boulter is next off. She had a tremendous week, if not one of the best of her career. 27 years of age, but she's moved up 22 points to 27 in the world. However, Boulter has steadily been progressing the last 2 seasons, so she's definitely poised to break into the top 20 if she can maintain her performance, which is a very big ask from the past fortnight. Garcia has a bit of a regression, 26 now in the world. Kalinskaya at 25, just 1 points regression. Pavlyuchenkova is up 1 to 24. Big difference here. Kalinskaya 25, Pavlyuchenkova 32. We can see Pavlyuchenkova with the likelihood to progress inside the top 20 because of her recent performances. We know she's been a Grand Slam finalist and she has been hovering inside the top 20 for some time now. Does she have the 7 keys? No. 6? Absolutely yes, sometimes. A good 4 to 5 solidified in her game, but she does not have all keys at her disposal. Kalinskaya, however, from the Australian Open and from the past few weeks, she's had a stellar run and she's been picking up those keys progressively, maintaining a current level of play that has her ranking ahead of others such as Kostyuk, to Yastremska, to even, Paolini is ahead of her, but she's closing in on Paolini when we're looking at, again, those metrics from the Australian Open. Both of these players are proving better off than others that reach that round of 16-ish stage. Okay, other players we've got here is Navarro, 23, up 3 places, 22 years of age, which also underscores an increasing likelihood to ascertain more keys into her arsenal to crack into the top 20. Other than that, we have the top 20 relatively sitting the same. Krejcikova is at 21. I'm going to argue that's a bit of a regression. She definitely has the potential to crack back into the top 10. However, those weapons in her game that we know she's got has taken a bit of a step back in the past season, and we're really looking for her to push that forward. So when we're really looking at the 7 keys and more so the 8th key, players between 20 to 11 in the world, we know they're privy to predominantly all 6 to potentially 7 keys. But when we're looking at if they're solidified in their game, the answer is no. They are on the cusp of solidifying them into their game, but there's still a weak point. And when we're looking at weaknesses, we're also looking at those percentages. So the frequency of application. And I can tell you this, and this is in the books as well, their frequency of application are a very big number of percentage points behind the top 10. And that's how I think exciting and explicit this gets, that we really can dissect the top 10 towards the top 20 when we're looking at not only the 7 keys, but also the percentage points in their rate of their consistency of application, which lags for those outside the top 10. And I think hats off goes to Paolini, really still sitting at 14 in the world. And it's going to be very interesting in Indian Wells how she tracks, if she maintains her ranking or if there's a regression. I think that really rounds out the women's tour when we're looking at the players. Top 10 is all the same. Swiatek is leading by quite a bit. Pegula is still sitting at number 5 in the world. Ostapenko's at number 10 with Sakari back inside at also number 9. It's going to be interesting to see how Zheng performs. She's sitting at number 8. If I guess she's able to produce another peak performance similar to the Australian Open, or we're going to see that regression. So definitely the next 1 to 2 weeks are really important to track for these players. But essentially the entirety of March is going to set these players up and position them quite, I will say, interestingly, with very good insights for Roland Garros, which is then only just around the corner. All right, I think that was a very big dissection, and it's time to head on over to the ATP Tour. All right, so when we're looking at the players here, we've got Franco Agamioni at 200 in the world. He's 30 years of age, and already those two basis points, we will call them, highlight a plateau that this player has been hovering there for some time now. The next ranking move we've got is Lai 2. He's an Aussie, 27 years of age, but he's moved up 10 points to 193, which means he's at a career high and has cracked into the top 200, which means let's see if he continues that trajectory, potentially towards the top 50, top 120 this season, if these peak performance cycles are able to be maintained. Because when we have players peak like this, and all you need is to follow on, let's say 20 points peaked within, let's say, over a 6-month period, and if that is cyclical, what happens is an Alcaraz, whereas Alcaraz was ranked outside the top 100 at the beginning of the season, at the end he ended up inside the top 10. It was that absolutely astronomical, but his performance progressions were already peaking. He already had ascertained what it took, what was required of him to maintain and produce those peak performance cycles, which means those 7 keys were continuously integrated in his game until they became solidified, but then they also were central focal points for the 8th key to be amplified. And I really would encourage you, all of you out there listening, to rewind that and re-listen, and rewind it and re-listen, because that's what we call rapid fire, and that's what highlights how a ranking mover can ascend from 200 towards the top 20 in the space of a season. It's incredibly exciting from my perspective, all the same, but it's also why when we're looking at the long game, we can also allow 10 years for a player to track from, say, 800, 900 in the world towards the top 20 and then the top 10, because some players will take a very progressive approach. But the good part about that is not that I'm going to recommend from 900 to 10 over a 10-year timeline. By all means, that is a baseline. But if you're able to fast track that steadily, the likelihood of you maintaining that ranking hold is incredibly high. An example of a player fast track not able to maintain, I'm going to use on the women's tour 2 players, Andreescu and Raducanu, both US Open Grand Slam champions, but both who ascended inside the top 10. I think Raducanu almost did, hovered outside there, inside the top 15 I think it was, but both have had steep regressions. Of course that's followed by injuries, but that's what happens. Too much too soon, of course you're going to get an injury if you're overloading yourself without monitoring those peak performance cycles, because you need to remember these cycles are named that for a very reason. They are not continuous. You need to plan those peaks. However, you are able to have a peak level as your new baseline, we say, and then up it up another notch for your peak. So a steady progression increases your baseline, so your baseline level of play, which is really important to understand. And then those expected peaks are your next peak. So your baseline could be 100 in the world and you're peaking to 80. Then you have a slight regression to 100 as your baseline, and then you're peaking to 60, for example, and then your new baseline's 80. That's just a very rough estimate when we're looking at performance, and I'm just using those metrics, so those numbers, as an example. But typically what happens, you could be ranked 20 in the world and you will get a round of 16 result, followed by a quarterfinal as your new peak performance, and then you're going to regress back to that round of 16. You're maintaining that baseline, another quarter as a peak, and then that quarterfinal becomes your new baseline for your performance until those finals become your next peak. And that's what has happened with Djokovic, which is very exciting to get into, and Swiatek is closely following. And these metrics, irrespective, even though the difference in Grand Slam championships won, we can track these cycles, these key patterns of play, and those baseline metrics, and what's expected, and what those peak performances are capable of. But players who do not understand those performance peaks, how to control those cycles, fall in, I guess, this problematic area where injuries happen, because they're continuously overloading themselves by trying to maintain those peaks, and it really needs to be monitored. Okay, that was a lot there. The next player, 188 in the world, 23 places up, is Jordan Laurie, 30 years of age, a very big, I think, peak inside the top 200 now. However, both of those numbers, so base points, suggest this is a peak nonetheless, but he's been hovering around this ranking range. Elias Ymer, all right, so we know his brother has recently retired, I think it was last year, so we won't get into that, but he's at 178. He's had 20 points regression, 27 years of age. It shows that he is, unfortunately, at a performance plateau, but a regressive plateau. And we're tracking forward closer and closer towards, I'm going to say, the top 100. And here we go, 140 in the world. Mikhail Kukushkin, 36 years of age, but he's up 25 points, which is incredibly impressive, which really underscores it really doesn't matter if you're 36 years of age or 26 years of age, the same applies. This is going to be quite interesting because he definitely has the potential, if he maintains this, to crack inside the top 100, which would be absolutely phenomenal. That said, it can go either way because we really want to track a player's past 6 months and following 6 months. And since I'm sharing these insights with you live, this is a very big progression for Kukushkin. At 36 years of age suggests potentially he's going to continue to hover around this ranking range, but if he ascertains an additional just one key inside the next 2 to 3 months, he definitely has that potential to crack inside the top 100. Okay, other notable players I will say outside the top 100 would be Borna Gojo. He's regressed to 115, down 10 points, 26 years of age. So this is going to be an indicator here if he slips back into the top 100 or continues a regressive streak towards the top 150, potentially top 200. And that's how I think how quick it can happen, a regression. And if you allow it to continue, if you stop it in its tracks and you opt to hover, or you progress, you begin the uptake of these 7 keys to progress towards the top 20, and you grab that 8th key and integrate it into your game to cross the threshold into the top 10. Two players who know what that's like. 117, 118 in the world. We've got Schwartzman and Gasquet, 31 and 37 years respectively. Both these players know what it takes, but it looks like these players have lost their grip on those 7 keys and have steadily been regressing. That said, both players are dark horses on any day when they hit a performance peak. That said, that baseline, that peak performance is not correlated with a top 10 tennis ranking anymore. It's more so correlated with that second, third, potentially fourth round performance at that peak, although those peaks we are not seeing as frequently because of their current regressions. A ranking mover 35 points up is Corentin Mortu. He's 24 years of age. He's now ranked 105 in the world, and this is a very big jump, 35 points. Now, if you look at it and consider 2 more basis point of rankings like that or progressions will place Mortut closer to the top 60 in the world. Now, if he can manage that inside the next, I will say, 6 to 12 months, he will be a player to track come the Australian Open. And that's when I think it gets really exciting. When we're looking at these players ranked outside the top 100, we can see those progressions and all those regressions happening. But if they're able to maintain those progressions and track closer towards the top 100 and find themselves inside the top 100 comfortably, that's when I think alarm bells ring in a very good way come Grand Slam season. All right, we're now inside the top 100. I'm going to quickly look at a few ranking movers. 89 in the world, up 12 places, is Pedro Martinez, 26 years of age. Let's see if he's tracking, if this is something that's going to be continued. Nishioka, up 10 places, 72 in the world, 28 years of age. Wawrinka's sitting very happy at 70, a bit of a progression of 4 points, 38 years of age, and I really think this goes underrated at times, especially when we're looking at Djokovic at 36, number 1 in the world. Wawrinka is still in the game. The same applies to Murray. He's up 6 points at 61 now in the world, and he's 36. And now I think they're on a very, even spread. Wawrinka, who is a little bit older than Murray, but for some reason Murray gets all of this bad press about, the media harking on him to retire, and he's already 20 points ahead of Wawrinka, but Wawrinka is holding steady there. So I think that's just food for thought. Both of those players are still in the game and both exceptional in their own right, and the same applies. 54 in the world, Gael Monfils, 37 years of age. All of these 3 players have been ranked well inside the top 10 for a number of seasons, and they're still holding their own. Do they have the 7 keys solidified in their game? No. Are they capable of having the 7 keys solidified in their game? Yes. Now, this is a bit of an ironic answer, irrespective of their age, because previously they have had the 7 keys solidified in their game. What we're looking for is that level of upkeep, that level of maintenance. But as a player gets older, it actually gets a little bit more difficult to progress, to maintain that baseline when we're looking at those peak performances. So when we're looking at Djokovic, for example, similar age, but he hasn't slipped. He hasn't had that steep regression or those injuries that have sidelined him like these other players. And so he's been very fortunate in this respect. And I think it's very important to be mindful of that as a player's body regresses, in a manner of speaking, with their ranking. We're looking for that baseline to happen again. Are they capable of that? Absolutely yes. However, it is reliant on them keeping those 7 keys front and center as focal points every single session. If that's not the case, as we know it is for Djokovic, this is where these regressions happen. Okay, that is I don't normally give away too many insights like that, so I really would encourage you to underscore that, write it down, and keep that close in your training plan. Okay, other players I think we're looking at now when we are inside the top 30. 39 in the world, 26 years of age, Alejandro Tabilo. We've got a couple of players, a Chilean player's been progressing of late. So he's up 12 points. Now this is going to be very interesting if we see him tracking closer towards the top 20, or this is followed by a regression. Other players we can look at, we've got Felix. He's had a slight regression, 31, and he's only 23 years of age. Now I'm really looking to see Felix progress closer towards the top 20, but he's really at a rankings plateau at the moment. He's been hovering around here for, I want to say, the best part of the last 6 months. Mazzetti, 22 years of age, is the same. He does have that capacity. He has been marked with some really good performance indicators, but these are not being leveraged. 26 is absolutely a phenomenal ranking to have by all accounts, but when we're looking at progressions, that's not to come yet. Other players that we're looking at, Bublik, he's progressed even more, so 3 points. He's at 20 in the world, and he definitely has had a stellar start to his year, 26 years of age. Baez has had an absolutely phenomenal fortnight, 23 years of age, up 2 points to 19 in the world, and he's definitely been, I think, one of the most underrated players this season, who's really shot up into the spotlight. And now that is closely followed by Humbert, 25 years of age, up 4 ranking points to 14 in the world. He has had an absolutely stellar start to his season, has almost come out of nowhere, and he is on the brink of cracking into the top 10, which is absolutely phenomenal and ironic at the same time, because directly behind Humbert is Dimitrov, Fritz, and Tsitsipas, which is really an oh my goodness moment, because all 3 of those players have achieved quite remarkable, let's say, metrics throughout the past seasons. But Humbert has really creeped up there, and he's already ahead of Shelton, Paul, TFO, and ahead of Bublik. So that really, I think, should highlight how those progressions have been working for him, how he's been able to solidify at least 5 to 6 of those keys into his game, and I'll bet that 7 keys is hovering, progressively being integrated into his game, and he's definitely primed to become a barrier breaker alongside de Minaur, who was this season's first barrier breaker this season. So this is very interesting to watch. However, this now brings me to Casper Ruud, who has cracked back into the top 10 finally. So recall roughly about 10 episodes ago where Ruud was touched on. Last year wasn't a solid year. He had regressed outside the top 10, but he's definitely been primed to find his form again and was marked as a barrier breaker again this season. So again, the data's been correct. I love it when I'm right. When I get the data too, I really do the talking. But for some unknown reason, de Minaur toppled Ruud in the events that have transpired the past week, but he's regressed to 10 in the world, while Ruud has progressed 2 basis points to 9 in the world. If someone can explain that to me, please do. But I do say that tongue-in-cheek because I do understand how the ranking points work, etc. Tsitsipas has actually moved up 1, so he's 11 in the world now. He's on the cusp again of becoming a barrier breaker. But we've got these 2 players now vying, because de Minaur is inside the top 10, but it's also almost like a dance move here because Tsitsipas is just outside. And when we're looking at these points, they're very close behind one another. The same applies for Fritz, but also Ruud. So and Hurkacz is very closely. So I think Indian Wells is going to be very interesting for these 4-5 players and what's about to happen. And that, I think, really wraps up the rankings, the points, the movers, let's say in the past week. And time permitting now, we're going to dive into very briefly the events over the past week. So we're going to track back and start on the WTA tour and look at San Diego. We all know the outcomes, but let's be really quick here and look at some key performances. Pegula had a very good win over Nymaner in the round of 16, 6-love, 6-4. Bulter, we know the result, 3 sets over Haddad Maia. Really underscores her ranking progression and why the likelihood for her to maintain that and progress further is really on her side. Saville, who's back roughly almost inside the top 100, definitely deserving of. Got a win here in 3 sets over Maria in the round of 16. And Kostyuk, who was also touched on round of 16, got a win, which was really good. Now, when we're looking at the other side of the round of 16, Pavlyuchenkova got the win against Wang. Yastremska, however, fell to Blinkova. Sidiakova fell to Navarro. But remember, Navarro progressing in the rankings, edging towards the top 20. Vekic here, round of 16, got the win against Staksuk. Now, I really hope I did my best to pronounce that correctly. Okay, quarterfinals though. Kostyuk, with her ranking progression, progressed over Pavlyuchenkova in 3. Vekic fell to Bulter. Now, this shows that Vekic really can pack the punch. Although she's around 30, I'm going to say on a slight regression here, but Bulter definitely on a progression. Pegula progressed, again, 3 sets over Blinkova. Sevilla fell to Navarro in the quarterfinals in 2. But look at this, semi-finals, Kostyuk got a win over Pegula. That is absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to say that's her best performance since the Australian Open, and it's almost been incredibly underrated. And I think what really got the spotlight was because Bulter toppled Navarro in straight sets, and we know that in result 3 sets Bulter over Kostyuk, but that almost could have gone either way given that first set. But Kostyuk, her ranking's really been hovering around that 33-32 with Yastremska. But when we're looking at the results from the Australian Open, Kostyuk, I think, deserves to be alongside Bulter here, around 25 in the world. So that's definitely primed, I think, within the next couple of weeks, if Kostyuk's able to maintain her level of play. All right, we had Austin underway, so a couple of plays here. We got Parry with the win, Wang with the win, Kalane with the win, and Townsend falling to 1 in the round of 16. Okay, I'm being very quick here. Schmidlova, 3 sets against Vickery. Wang with the win. Stevens falling to Sevastova in straight sets. Collins with the win in 3 sets, taking that third set, 6-love, round of 16 against Volynets. All right, now we've got quarterfinal stage. 1 very good win over Wang, straight sets. Kalinina, 3 sets over Parry. Schmidlova over Sevastova, but Sevastova retired and she was up a set and a break. So again, we're looking at these retirements, and it really is a cause for concern because next we've got Collins against Wang. Wang got that first set 6-2 and Collins retired. Recall previous episode when I touched on these retirements, and they're really not okay. And what I mean by that is recall again earlier in today's episode when I'm touching on why players get sidelined, why they get injured, and we really can look at those peak performance cycles not being controlled, not being handled appropriately to ensure a player is steady on that baseline, and those peak performance cycles then are controlled. That's a little bit of a play on words there. All right, semi-final stage, Yuan got the win over Schmidlova, 6-love, 6-3, very solid, and Kalinaya, number 1 seed, fell to Wang, 6-3, 7-6, and we all know the result in the final of Austin was 1 over Wang. So we had the 8th seed over the 6th seed, so it was a little bit unexpected, but very evenly tied, 6-4, 7-6, and recall touching on those ranking movers, we know then what has happened. Both of them are sitting roughly around 50, and we know that they are both poised for key key progressions. Okay, Indian Wells is kicking off later today, which is very exciting. But we do have the qualifying that has been underway. A couple of, I think, notable players when we're looking at qualifying going through. Hsay, 3 sets in the first round, but then fell to Hibino in 3 sets. In the second round, Townsend has qualified. She had to go through first and second rounds of qualifying. Cornet was in qualifying, although she fell to I apologize for the pronunciation. Gadecki. Now remember that I pinpointed her as one of the Aussie that has been progressing inside the top 200 but sitting outside the top 100, fell in 2 sets to Podorska. Other players, Whitmire fell straight sets to Shramkova. Other players, we've got Seigman. So remember, shortly after the Australian Open, Seigman really did have a performance peak in her singles, although she has lost in 3 sets to Hontama. I think other players, Parks has fallen today in straight sets. Ondreeva has gotten the win in 3 sets, second round of qualifying over Day. That's a very good win for her. Ondreeva, so this is Erica here, has cracked inside the top 100, is joining her younger sister Maria now. Both of them comfortably inside the top 100. Irani is still in action. She's won through in both rounds, first over Krunik, then Rodionova. Very good. Dart got through first round and then fell to Hovde in the second round. Other, I think, players to touch on here is Watson. Watson fell in the first round, which is a bit upsetting, obviously, for her. But when we're looking at those rankings and we're looking at how they're tracking, this is why it's touching on a hover there, a ranking plateau, and or potentially that regression. All right, moving quickly over to the ATP Tour, and we're going to start in Dubai and picking up from last week. So we are in the round of 16, and a couple of players to pinpoint here is Korda got the win over Vandy Zandschulp, 6-1, 6-love is a very good win for him. Humbert over Murray, 2 and 4. That really underscores his current ranking rise to 14 in the world. And Bublik over Griekenspor, 7-6, 7-6, and that was 8 and 2 in the tie breaks respectively. A very good win. Also underscores his rise to top 20 now in the world. Hercax, a very good win over O'Donnell. Lecture over Kakanakop, very good win, 3 sets. And Rublev over Kazuks, straight sets. Now remember, Kazuks was one to watch on the radar with his metrics from the Australian Open and following. So this is going to be very interesting if his ranking progresses or hovers, but a very good win for Rublev because Kazuks is not a very easy player, I would say. Medvedev over Sonegro, 3 sets there. All right, quarterfinal stage. Medvedev, very good win over Davidovich Fokina. Rublev, good win over Korda. We know Korda's been hovering around the top 30. So that's again a hover. We haven't really been seeing him reach that next performance peak. Humbert, a very good win over Hercax. Look, this really underscores 14 in the world. Hercax is a top 10 player. Indian Wells is really going to, I think, ruffle some feathers in respect to, I think, these players on the cusp of breaking into the top 10 and players not inside the top 8%. Those 2% of players every season that regress outside the top 10 in the world. Bublik, a very good win over Lecheka. 6-4, 4-1. Looks like there was a retirement there by Lecheka later on in that second set. Okay, semi-final stage. Humbert got a win over Medvedev. That is a very good win. That's really sensational in my opinion. 7-5, 6-3. Medvedev, he's been playing quite solid, and this really, I think, highlights, not just underscores, highlights Humbert's new peak performance. And I'm really interested now to see if Humbert's able to deliver this following week and throughout March, or if he's going to regress. That is a very good indicator for the coming weeks, if not months. Bublik with a win over Rublev. That's a very good result. I think we know what happened in third set, and unfortunately Rublev's behaviour. So we won't really shine the spotlight there, though I think hopefully we can all agree that the yelling and screaming and tantrums on court is not appropriate. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Final, Humbert, Bublik, both of these players ranking progressions, and I'm having a bit of a giggle here because I love it. The data has really been supporting both of these players, and both of these players have been tracking. And what I mean by that is that they've challenged themselves with that baseline, and they've upped the ante with that baseline to reach new peak performances, and this is correlated with their rankings. So whilst I've touched on, for example, Collins and her performance peaks and rankings not correlating with her results, just as a player, as an example, ranking correlations are here. And when we're looking at a player with their performance and their rankings and those correlations tying together, that is what underscores a very good metric. I will say no more, however, it is underscored in how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking. Okay, I'm getting a little bit excited here, and I think you can hear that in my voice. Now we have Mexico. So to wrap up, and this is very good, it is a very strong field, and we're going to go from the round of 16 because we touched on those earlier rounds last week. Shelton, a very good win, 3 sets over Analdi. However, Shelton has been hovering in his ranking. Tiafoe, he fell in the round of 60 to Kopfor. Okay, Draper, a very good win over Nishioka. Tsitsipas, a good win over Kaboli. Rudd, a very good win over Lachovic. Straight sets for both of them. And Rune, a good win over Kokavechik, a qualifier. I again apologize for that pronunciation. De Minaur, a very good win over Offner. All right, here we go. Here's the action. Quarterfinals, a really jam-packed field now. Rudd over Shelton in 3 sets. That tie break actually was, I think it was 7-5 there. And that is a very solid result from Rudd. 6-4, 6-4. This really underscores his performance cracking back into the top 10. Draper had a very good win over Cekmanovic. De Minaur, that's a very solid win over Tsitsipas. 3 sets, but I hope we can all be on the same page here going Tsitsipas is 11 in the world, De Minaur is now 10. De Minaur is definitely deserving of being deeper inside the top 10 at this stage with his stellar results this season in comparison to other players sitting inside the top 10, if not those hovering slightly outside, for example, Tsitsipas. And Rune is probably De Minaur, should be ahead of Rune. Rune got the win here, 7-6, 7-6 over Copenfer. Again, quarterfinals, semi-finals. Rudd against Rune. Not straight sets, 3 sets. That's a very good win for Rudd. Really underscoring again, being back inside the top 10. De Minaur over Draper. Again, 3 sets, 4 love, and it looks like Draper retired with 2 games to go. It baffles me why a player would retire with just 2 games to go. But that is, I think everyone's got different opinions there. Although I think when we're looking at the world of retirements, there's been quite a number of them of late. Let's finish a game cleanly and fairly by all accounts. Final, De Minaur over Rudd, 4-4. And this is what I was touching on earlier, which is a little bit dumbfounding because Rudd is now 9 in the world and De Minaur is 10 in the world. And I would argue that De Minaur with this win over Rudd is definitely deserving to be ranked a little bit higher. That really sums up that week's that result of Mexico. Now we've got Chile. Now, Baez, and Baez's ranking progression, because he came out with the win here, 3 sets over Tibillo, with that second set being 6-love, then 6-4. I'm not going to dig deeper into the other players in this tournament because we're starting to run out of time in today's episode, but that really underscores why Baez had that big ranking jump and is on the radar as a ranking mover. Now, quickly, before we wrap today's episode up, the qualifying of Indian Wells and a couple of players to touch on. Saboth Wild is through. He's won both of his rounds, but recall in previous episodes, he's actually had a very good start the last couple of weeks. Pullman's the Aussie has gone down to Brody. Other players I think notable to touch on, Gaston has fallen. Again, has previously been one to watch, but Kudla got the win in the first round of qualifying against him. Kazooks was again a player to watch. Hassan, however, got the win straight sets, really underscoring those peak performances and then those regressions if those performances are not being able to be maintained, especially when we're looking at first rounds of qualifying. Other players, Nagal, he's I think India's number one player, cracked inside the top 100 and then has recently regressed slightly outside the top 100, got through the first round of qualifying but has fallen to Hong in the second round of qualifying in 3 sets. Other matches is Jamur has lost to Lestine in the first round of qualifying there. Quinn has gone all the way through, has toppled Hallias in the first round and Vasori in the second round of qualifying in 3 sets. Goffin, he's won his first round. His second round of qualifying will be on today. And that really wraps up, I think, qualifying Indian Wells. I'm really looking forward to seeing, I think, how the next week or 2 plays out, because Indian Wells is a little bit longer then I think the other events, which is a little bit exciting, definitely for both sides, WTA and ATP. And look, today has been really long and we don't really have enough time to dive into the secrets to optimal coaching success. But I really want to, I think, draw your attention to the chapter that we've started. And recall in our last 2 episodes, I've dived a little bit into the introduction, which is science in sport. And I think, if anything, hopefully today, when we're touching on science in sport, really is the additional metrics that I've shared. And I really want each and every one of you to take that with you, considering science in sport, the data, the metrics that I've touched on. Really, when I've been breaking down the top 200 to top 100 and those 7 keys towards those 8 keys. And remember, each of those 7 keys and the 8th key is wrapped in vigorous and rigorous amounts of data and science, and the research, the investigation that have been responsible for uncovering each respective key is absolutely immense. And I think I really want to wrap up today's episode by saying science in sport is, I think, the absolute benchmark of how we really push the marker further. How at AMA International we've been delivering that next generation of play that coincides with developing that top 10 tennis ranking. And thank you so much for joining us today. That really was a quick wrap up because we have gone a bit over, but I really hope you've enjoyed that top 200 breakdown on the WTA and ATP tours respectively, plus those insights across the tournaments wrapping up the past week and as Indian Wells gets underway. To dive more into science in sport and that specific chapter in the secrets to optimal coaching success, head on over to AMA International to grab a copy and follow along in future episodes. And to grab your copy of my new release, How to Develop a Top 10 Tennis Ranking, you can also find it on AMA International or head on over to Amazon, irrespective where you're based in the world. For any comments or questions, head to AMA or Topic Thread, the social platform set on data privacy. To interact with Beyond Top 10 Tennis, head on over to Twitter, Instagram or YouTube. To catch up on our blogs, head on over to AMA International and look for our blog tab, or head on over to Medium. And as always, I'll leave all the links in the episode notes. For something different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That's where my fictional release is. For something left of field, visit Spruik for some random polls. And of course, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, like, share, and all of the above would be absolutely phenomenal. For those of you who are interested, we do have scholarships available on AMA International, as well as options to work with me exclusively to optimize your performance and to nudge you closer towards that top 10 tennis ranking. So don't be shy and come and say hi. On that note, thank you so much for listening. I am so incredibly grateful. I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis, and I'll see you next time.